to Barnabas's Boneyard. I am your host, Barnabas, and welcome one and all to episode 5. Today I'm going to be discussing a brand new theatrical horror release, The Pope's Exorcist. So The Pope's Exorcist just came out over this past weekend. That would be, I believe, Friday the 14th of April, 2023. And it actually came out alongside another, highly anticipated horror release in Renfield, starring Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult. I was actually not able to see Renfield yet. I'm still hoping to do so, and when I do plan on making a video for it. But I did go and see The Pope's Exorcist. I actually have a written review for it up right now on defactofilmreviews.com. So I'll include a link down in the description, but you can go there, check out the written review as well, and see my score. But if you're already here, before you do so, then please, I implore you to stay and listen to my review here on YouTube. Of course, if you like the content and you want to see more, then click the follow button, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, all that good stuff. Hit the bell for more notifications. And there will be plenty more Grave Discussions content, including Barnabas's Boneyard, in the very near future. So please stay tuned for that. Now let's get right into it. So what is the movie actually about? Well, I'm actually not that surprised that this movie beat out Renfield. I mean, Nicolas Cage is hot right now with a lot of incredible movies, but he has really mostly been in a lot of indie features or just kind of more outright experimental kind of films like The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent and even Pig. Movies that are not really that commercially present, and projects that I think a wider audience is not that apt to see over something like even Renfield, for example. But Russell Crowe, of course, is a huge star. I mean, he has been in Hollywood for a really long time, much like Nicolas Cage, but Crowe, of course, usually will take on these kind of higher profile films, and The Pope's Exorcist is no exception. I mean, the film got, pretty good marketing, and a lot of people turn out for it, so kudos to the film. That said, I was not the biggest fan of it, and I'll tell you why. So the movie is about Father Gabriele Amorth, and I know I'm butchering the pronunciation of the last name, but anyway, he was actually a real exorcist, I believe, for the Vatican. So the movie is essentially kind of borrowing from his memoirs, and I haven't read the memoirs, so I don't know if the story presented in the film is actually one of those accounts. I assume so. But that's essentially the gist of it. So Crowe plays Amorth, and it takes place during, I believe, the late 80s in Europe. And it essentially follows one story in his illustrious career, where after an incident involving a mentally challenged man, Father Amorth gets summoned essentially by the devil itself, who is possessing this young boy that has recently moved into this old rundown abbey with his mother and sister. They were willed the building by their late patriarch, who died, I think, like a year ago, and ever since then the boy has been mute due to the trauma. You can kind of see where I'm going with this. So, he gets possessed. He calls out this Father Amorth, specifically for some reason. Why the devil would specifically want to contend with this one very particular priest is beyond me, but that's essentially the gist. So the exorcist comes in. He's essentially shadowed by this other priest, Father Expel, played by Daniel Savato. And so the two of them kind of tag team this whole situation, trying to exorcise this demon out of this little boy. And that's kind of the gist of the movie. There is a little bit more to it. I mean, the clergy, of course, the Pope and and the sort of top brass of the Vatican are at ends with Father Amorth because of some things that went down in his past, his sort of controversial tactics in terms of, addressing the supposed possessions rather, and how he goes about performing exorcisms or handling these situations. So, Crowe's character is kind of like this almost rebellious clergyman of sorts. But of course, he still has his faith. He still has his mission, and he's is very dedicated to that mission. His character actually, I think, was done quite well. And Crowe, of course, is a phenomenal actor. So no matter what role you stick him in, he's going to excel, right? But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But yeah, there's that, and there's also sort of this other mystery that's tied into the possession angle, which was all right. Involves some kind of like secret underground area under the house, because there's always one of those, right? So with everything that I've said so far, I mean, does it sound kind of familiar? You got the two exorcists coming in to help the child. Very William Friedkin's 1973 masterpiece, The Exorcist, right? Well, you'd be right. I mean, this film borrows from that very heavily. I mean, it's obviously the most significant influence to the Pope's Exorcist. But along with that, you have influences from some other, supernatural kind of possession horror films as well. I mean, there's shades of The Conjuring and all sorts of other films, right? I mean, it's kind of unavoidable at this point with any movie, really. You're going to see shades of some type of past work in anything. I mean, even if you make the most crazy experimental thing ever, right? Take like Mad God, for instance, right? I mean, it's not like stop motion hasn't been done before. That film is still incredibly unique, but sure, you could probably point to some things that maybe have been done before. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good example because that film is incredibly unique, but you get what I'm saying, right? Something like The Pope's Exorcist, especially, is a commercial blockbuster horror film made for a wide audience, is going to be kind of redundant. And that was, I think, one of its biggest flaws, is just it was loaded with tropes, loaded with cliches, and it just never really stretched beyond those things, beyond itself. And I wish it did. I mean, it's a rated R horror film with Russell Crowe at the center of it all, right, leading the charge. I just wish it was a little bit bigger, bolder. It did some different things and wasn't afraid to appeal to, those gorehounds, or to really like load in some scares, some good scares. But at the end of the day, yeah, it was just kind of repetitive of like all those other supernatural possession type films that came before it. And it never really went beyond that. And on top of that all, it just was kind of corny in parts. Like, it was just tonally a mess, in my opinion. Crowe was kind of naturally witty and funny and charming and all that, which is fine. You need a little bit of that levity. I mean, even Patrick Wilson in the Conjuring series is like that. But the difference is that in The Conjuring, you use that as an example, the scares are so much more intense. The buildup is so much better. In The Pope's Exorcist, for some reason, the horror elements themselves were just kind of a letdown, because there was very little suspense in between those like more, I guess, simple moments, right? The more humanistic moments. And so there was so little suspense. I mean, when the actual horror came, it's not like you were waiting for it. It just kind of hits you right away. And in my opinion, at least for a movie like this, I don't know if that's the right way to go about it. So the pacing at times surrounding those, those scary moments, or what were meant to be scary moments, was just really dull, because it just cut into it way too quickly. And so you're removing any chance of building that fear, building that tension in the viewer. And so I think in that aspect, the the direction there and how the editing was done, it just felt really rushed, you know. Even when you cut to the possessed kid, it's always just, it cuts right into it and something crazy happens, and that's really kind of it. There's very little suspense. What actually fills the gaps in between those moments are like all these theological discussions, and, you know, Crow and the other characters discussing faith and all that, which is fine, but it is a horror movie, and it's a rated R horror movie, no less. So in my opinion, that was a bit of a letdown, just not done as well as I would have liked. And then when you're actually in those moments, you know, the vast majority of it is the possessed boy and his interactions with Russell Crowe's character and some of the other characters. The supporting cast, you know, I wasn't really a huge fan of, I'll just say that much, especially the family. The family is like incredibly cookie cutter. You know, you've seen him before. The little boy with his selective muteness, and the kind of like dejected, traumatized mom trying to collect them all and be the cool mom, but still like be a good mom. And then the rebellious teen daughter who smokes cigarettes and dresses kind of provocatively and everything like that. So, you know, there's not really much to them, and their story gets lost in the grand scheme of things, which is never a good thing. So by the end of it, you just really don't care about them at all, right? Even the kid. But the kid, oh God, you know, I wish that I could say otherwise, and I really hate saying this about a child actor, because I know they are a child, right? I mean, I'm sure he was cast for a reason, but for me personally, the kid, Peter D'Souza Feihoni, I believe. Apologize if I got the pronunciation of that name wrong, but I just thought he was kind of miscast. I didn't think he was very good at all. And again, I have to reiterate this. I know he's a child, but still, when he was possessed, I mean, I just wasn't feeling it. I thought it was too much. I thought it was very over the top acting. I know he's supposed to be possessed and all that. He's supposed to be wild and crazy and intense and menacing and all that, but it was just kind of corny and cringy to me personally. And it doesn't help that the dialogue that they gave him as, you know, this demon or the devil or whatever, was like also pretty corny and cringe inducing. You'll see what I mean if you watch the movie, or if you have watched the movie. I think anyway. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if you feel differently about it, but there were just so many lines and how they were presented that were just kind of off-putting for me. You know, I didn't feel nervous or terrified by them. I just kind of like silently chuckled to myself because I thought they were, you know, pretty wild, pretty over the top. So wasn't a huge fan of that, unfortunately. The actual effects and the gore itself were fine. There wasn't too much to them. I mean, you've seen it all before. Again, I have to keep hammering that point home. You know, you've got the crazy contortionist stuff, and then there's a few acts of violence, but really most of it pales under something that happens in like the first 5 minutes of the movie, which I'm not going to spoil it, but there it is kind of a trigger warning. There may be some animal violence, but that's all I'm going to say. That honestly is like the most brutal thing in this entire movie, which is crazy. But yeah, that is that. So the horror elements themselves for me were really underwhelming, unfortunately. So the movie is definitely carried by Russell Crowe. And I mean, you do have some other good supporting cast members as well. You got Cornell John as Bishop Lumumba. Franco Nero is here, veteran, of course, in Hollywood, playing the Pope himself, which is very cool to see. But, you know, and then, of course, Zavato as Father Escabel also does a good job. But those are really the standouts, you know. The production design is also fantastic. The locations are really phenomenal, which is also, you know, is a letdown because they had a lot of these fantastic locations. Most of the film takes place in this big, rundown, dingy, creepy abbey, which is cool, but they didn't really explore too much of it. They focused primarily on the inside, on like a few rooms, and that was kind of it. I wish that there was more to it. I think there was potential for them to really film across the breadth of this whole big abbey, in these like really long antique kind of hallways, and really introduce some really spooky shots, especially at nighttime, but they didn't really do that, unfortunately. They did dress up the outside really nicely, and there's this cool kind of side plot that's tied into the main narrative about this kind of underground section of the abbey, which I'm not going to spoil any of, but that part of it was kind of cool. Introduces some almost like alternative history toward the end of the film, which I thought was pretty intriguing. Got away from the like sort of more simplistic main story about the possession, which is good, but again felt quite over the top. And I don't know, the way it was set up at the very end also just kind of felt like, a money grab as well. I'm not going to spoil it, but if you see it, I think you'll probably understand what I'm talking about. So overall, I am not the biggest fan of the Pope's Exorcist, unfortunately. Some good elements, great set design, overall pretty decent production design. There are elements of the visual effects, surprisingly, that are good, and some that are not so good. Like some of the CGI felt a little bit too obviously CGI, and it kind of took away from it a little bit. But at the same time, there were parts of it that were also pretty good. These almost like dreamlike sequences. I wish the movie almost did more of that than some of the kind of more hokier, almost like dressed up parts, which just felt off. I don't know. I can't explain it much more than that, but overall, just very redundant, cliche, just felt way too samey, and ultimately just kind of dull. So even though Crowe did a great job, put on a fantastic performance in what I consider at least to be his first true horror role, even he couldn't really save this one from just being much more of the same. I think, casual audiences who are not huge horror fans or who don't care that much will probably enjoy this movie. I mean, it has fun moments. It's action-packed. The pacing is honestly pretty decent, apart from, the actual horror moments and how it goes into that, how it transitions into those moments. But overall, pretty good pacing. So, I think, just general theater goers will probably enjoy this one. But for the horror faithful, the genre vets who are, looking for something more, who are going into this expecting to see The Exorcist 2.0 or just otherwise above average, supernatural horror film and Exorcist, type of picture, I think you're going to be disappointed. So that's my take on the Pope's Exorcist. Ultimately, I gave this one a 2 out of 5, and personally, I think that's fair. So let me know what you thought about it, if you have seen it or if you plan to go see it. Of course, I don't want to dissuade anybody from going to check out the film. That's never my intention, just giving you my honest feedback on it. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below. Share this if you like it, and I'll see you next time on Barnabas's Boneyard.